It was supposed to be a routine lift, the 38th time Brazil's most powerful crane would hoist a massive roof truss into place at Arena Corinthians, just weeks before the 2014 World Cup opening match. But at 12:30 p.m., with 94% of the stadium built and the clock ticking on a $513 million deadline, a faint shift beneath 2,185 tons of steel triggered a collapse that killed 2 workers and shattered Brazil's showcase stadium. The headlines claimed it was just an accident under pressure, yet the real story behind the $500 million disaster reveals a chain of ignored warnings, technical ambition, and political risk-taking that changed everything. How could a few millimeters of movement bring a global project to its knees? FIFA set the handover deadline for Arena Corinthians at December 31, 2013. No extensions, no exceptions. By late November, the stadium stood at 94% complete, but the final milestones were the most complex. Missing the deadline meant risking the opening match of the 2014 World Cup, along with the pride of São Paulo and the credibility of Brazil's World Cup promise. Every day of delay threatened penalties, global embarrassment, and political fallout. The project had already drawn fierce criticism. Over 1 million Brazilians filled the streets that June, demanding schools and hospitals instead of billion-dollar stadiums. But the pressure didn't just come from the public. FIFA's demands and the world's spotlight left no room for error. The construction team pushed through 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, trying to close the gap before the year's end. With the clock running out and the eyes of the world on them, the decision was made to press ahead with the final keystone lift, a single operation that would complete the 4,000-ton roof and unlock the stadium's full use. The schedule didn't just shape the work, it dictated the risks everyone was willing to take. Werner Sobeck, a German engineer known for pushing the boundaries of lightweight structures, designed the Arena Corinthians roof as a signature feature of the stadium. The plan called for 48 massive steel trusses, together weighing nearly 4,000 tons. Each truss was prefabricated, then hoisted into place one by one, forming a continuous ring above the stands. The design wasn't just about spectacle. The roof's geometry was calculated to amplify crowd noise to a thunderous 113 decibels, louder than a rock concert, giving the home team an edge and meeting FIFA's strict standards for atmosphere. But the most complex challenge came at the end. The final piece, a keystone truss weighing between 420 and 500 tons, was essential. Without it, the roof envelope would remain open, leaving the structure incomplete and the stadium unusable. The entire roof assembly sequence depended on this single decisive lift. Only after the keystone was in place could the remaining membranes and secondary elements be installed, locking the structure and allowing the stadium to pass its final inspections. Every technical ambition, every political promise, funneled down to this one operation. The deadline, the budget, and Brazil's reputation all rode on the safe and timely installation of that last massive truss. The Liebherr LR11350. Crawler crane arrived on site as a feat of modern engineering. Its capacity, 1,350 metric tons. In the suspended derrick configuration chosen for Arena Corinthians, the machine stood with a 102-meter main boom and a 42-meter back boom, stretching higher than a 30-story building. Fully assembled, the crane weighed about 2,185 tons. Moving it to São Paulo required dozens of heavy trucks. Assembly took a specialist crew 4 days, working with precision to pin together each segment of the superstructure, ballast trays, and boom sections. For the roof lifts, the LR11350 was rigged with a massive counterweight system. Central and superstructure ballast alone topped 340 tons, with up to 600 tons of suspended ballast at the rear. Every detail, from the boom geometry to the rigging, was calculated to handle the extreme loads of the roof trusses. The lift plan called for 48 steel trusses, each weighing between 80 and 120 tons, to be placed one by one. The crane repeated this operation 37 times without incident, each pick following the same sequence: rigging, hoisting, swinging, and setting the truss into position. With every successful lift, the operation became routine, the team more confident. The 38th lift, the heaviest, between 420 and 500 tons, was the keystone. But by now, the process felt familiar. This pattern is known in engineering as normalization of deviance. When a high-risk task is repeated without failure, small shortcuts and risks can become invisible, accepted as part of the job. In Milwaukee in 1999, a similar stadium truss lift with a giant crawler crane, nicknamed Big Blue, ended in disaster when softened ground and wind combined to topple the machine. The lessons from Big Blue echoed on the Arena Corinthians site, but routine success masked the danger. By late November 2013, the LR11350 had become the backbone of the project's final push, its reliability taken almost for granted. The stage was set for the decisive lift. At 12:30 p.m. on November 27, 2013, the LR11350's winches began raising the final roof truss. The load, close to 500 tons, rose slowly, guided by spotters and riggers stationed across the east stand. For the 38th time, the operation followed the same steps: tension on the rigging, lift from the mat, and a controlled swing toward the waiting support columns. But as the truss neared its intended position, a sharp metallic grating cut through the noise of the site. Sports reporter Rodrigo Vesoni, present for a press check, later described the sound as metal grating on metal, chills. The boom, extending over the east stand, began to buckle. In a matter of seconds, the massive steel arm folded, sending the suspended truss plunging downwards. The falling structure struck the stadium's east seating bowl, slicing through the world's largest LED screen and crushing rows of newly installed seats. Debris rained onto the lower levels, twisting steel and shattered concrete in its path. Roughly 1,700 workers were assigned to the site that day. Most had left their posts for the midday break, scattering to canteens and rest areas away from the hazard zone. Stonemason Evandro Pereira, who had just passed beneath the crane minutes earlier, later recalled, "I had just walked under that crane." The timing spared dozens, perhaps hundreds, from the path of the collapse. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Alarms sounded, dust billowed from the east stand, and emergency crews rushed to the scene. The entire site locked down, and all lifting operations halted. In less than a minute, a routine lift had become a disaster, leaving the stadium's structure torn open and the project's future in doubt. Rain-soaked ground can turn a stable foundation into a hidden threat. In São Paulo, days of heavy rainfall left the soil beneath the crane saturated, filling the tiny spaces between grains with water. When a machine like the LR11350 moves into position, each of its tracks presses down with 39.02 tons per square meter, enough to crush concrete, if not spread over a wide area. Under normal conditions, compacted soil resists this force, but when water fills the pores, the soil's strength drops sharply. Even a few millimeters of movement at the base can have dramatic consequences above. Civil Defense Inspector Jair Paca de Lima summed it up. A few millimeters caused the crane to tilt. At a boom length of over 100 meters, a base shift of just 2 millimeters can swing the tip by several centimeters. That tiny tilt multiplies as it travels up the boom, pushing the structure beyond its safe working angle. The result is a geometric amplification. What starts as a barely noticeable subsidence at ground level becomes a dangerous lean at the top. Engineers rely on precise ground checks and compaction records to guarantee bearing capacity. But when soil is saturated, its ability to support heavy loads drops unpredictably. If the mat or track sits on even a slightly soft patch, the crane's immense weight can force the ground to settle unevenly. Once the tilt begins, the forces inside the boom change in ways the design can't tolerate. The entire load shifts off-center, and the structure is forced to absorb stresses it was never meant to handle. In São Paulo, that invisible movement, just a few millimeters, set off a chain reaction that no one could stop. The investigation into the Arena Corinthians collapse ran into a silent wall. The crane's load moment indicator, its black box, had stopped recording a full year before the disaster. Since November 2012, no telemetry data was captured for any lift, including the fatal 38th. Forensic teams searching for digital clues found only a gap. There were no real-time records of the crane's load, boom angle, or tilt in the moments before failure. Instead, investigators turned to site CCTV and construction videos, piecing together the sequence frame by frame. These visual records confirmed the timeline. The crane operated as planned, then suddenly listed and buckled. But without the LMI's data stream, the precise load conditions and internal stresses remained out of reach. In February 2014, Liebherr, the crane's manufacturer, released its formal findings. The report ruled out mechanical defect. Inspection of the wreckage found no broken pins, fractured welds, or signs of operator error. The boom and superstructure matched the design, and there was no evidence of overload from the crane itself. Instead, Liebherr's engineers traced the collapse to the ground beneath the crane's tracks. Rain-soaked soil had subsided by a few millimeters, just enough to tip the machine beyond its safe limits. This subtle ground movement shifted the crane's center of gravity, forcing the boom to absorb stresses it could not withstand. The collapse, according to Liebherr, began not in steel or wire, but in the invisible weakness of the saturated earth. Without black box telemetry, the investigation could only reconstruct what happened, not exactly how. The absence of LMI data left a permanent blind spot in the forensic record. The official narrative was shaped by what could be seen and measured after the fact. A crane free of defects, a foundation that failed, and a disaster triggered by forces just beneath the surface. Operation Lava Jato uncovered a hidden current running beneath the Arena Corinthians project, one that shaped every deadline, every shortcut, and every risk taken. Federal court records show Odebrecht executive Antonio Roberto Gavioli solicited a payment of 500,000 reais, coded internally as timão, during the stadium's procurement phase. At the same time, Club Vice President André Luiz de Oliveira received an illicit transfer of 121,000 euros, as documented in Odebrecht's own ledgers and confirmed by judicial exhibits. These were not isolated transactions. They coincided with a surge of contract amendments and cash flow emergencies in 2012 and 2013, when the project's original 335 million reais budget ballooned to 1.1 billion reais. As costs soared and oversight blurred, the pressure to deliver on time only grew. The construction site became a pressure cooker, 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, with workers racing to meet a deadline that could not move. Every financial irregularity found its way back to the ground, shrinking margins for error and tolerance for delay. The human cost was not an accident. It was a product of a system where money and schedule came first, and safety was always second. If you're finding value in this deep engineering investigation, the kind of technical analysis you won't find anywhere else, hit that like button and subscribe to Construction Legends. We're building a community of professionals, operators, and enthusiasts who want to understand not just what failed, but why these failures keep happening. Every subscription helps us investigate more disasters, interview more experts, and uncover the truths that corporate PR teams don't want you to know. Now let's talk about what happened after the dust settled, because the investigation that followed revealed failures that went far deeper than just unstable ground. The story of the LR11350 doesn't end in São Paulo. 2 years later, an identical crane collapsed at Mecca's Grand Mosque in Saudi Arabia. This time, the cause was the opposite. The boom was left upright during an extreme storm, and a sudden burst of wind brought down the machine. The result was catastrophic. 111 lives lost, the highest death toll from a crane collapse in modern history. Same model, same engineering, but a different invisible threat. Both disasters show how the smallest overlooked detail, whether in the soil or the sky, can unleash consequences no one can control. Arena Corinthians stands as a cautionary tale for anyone responsible for building on a deadline. 7 lessons emerge from its collapse, each rooted in the events that unfolded and the lives lost. First, the peril of go fever. When national pride and looming deadlines take over, safety checks get rushed or ignored. The drive to finish on time can override even the most basic risk assessments. Second, corruption is never just about money. Every bribe and under-the-table deal leads to cost overruns and schedule pressure, forcing unsafe decisions onto the worksite. Third, subcontractor chains create dangerous blind spots. Workers hired through third parties often miss safety briefings or lack the authority to halt work when they see something wrong. The 2 men killed that day were not direct employees of the main contractor, and their ability to intervene was limited by layers of responsibility. Fourth, foundation physics is absolute. Rain-soaked soil, invisible beneath the surface, can turn a stable site into a hazard. No amount of engineering can compensate if the ground itself is compromised. Fifth, too big to fail thinking clouds judgment. With billions already spent, the urge to push forward grows stronger than the willingness to pause and reassess. Sixth, white elephant projects leave lasting scars. Stadiums built for spectacle but abandoned or repurposed, like Brasília's Mané Garrincha, now housing government offices, or Manaus Arena, mostly empty, make the sacrifices of construction even harder to justify. Seventh, comparative learning is essential. Patterns from disasters like Milwaukee's Big Blue and Mecca's Grand Mosque show these failures repeat when lessons are ignored. For those on the ground, the checklist is simple. Always retest soil after heavy rain. Never operate with a faulty load moment indicator. Provide anonymous safety reporting, and give every worker true stop work authority. These are not ideals, but minimum requirements. The financial legacy of Arena Corinthians is heavy. The club faces 2.5 billion reais in debt. Fan crowdfunding brought in just 40 million reais, far short of the 700 million reais goal. In 2025, a 1.3 billion reais Nike deal will help service the debt, but the burden remains. The stadium's story echoes across Brazil, where white elephants stand as reminders of fleeting glory and lasting cost. 3 men paid with their lives: Fabio Luiz Pereira, 42, Ronaldo Oliveira dos Santos, 44, and Fabio Hamilton de Cruz, who died in a separate fall 4 months later. Each left behind a family. Their names mark the true cost of failure, a reminder that every lesson is written in lives as well as steel. On November 27, 2013, a 1,350-ton Liebherr LR11350 crawler crane collapsed at Arena Corinthians, killing 2 workers and destroying a key section of a $513 million World Cup stadium just weeks before FIFA's deadline. The investigation found that rain-soaked soil subsided by only a few millimeters, causing the cranes to tilt and the boom to fail, a chain reaction amplified by missing black box data from a long-defective load moment indicator. Despite 37 identical lifts before and repeated safety warnings, the final lift exposed how schedule pressure, budget overruns, and documented corruption, from 335 million reais planned to 1.1 billion reais spent, undermined safety. Some questions remain: the full chain of command around ignored warnings and the extent of root causes hidden in still classified contracts. Today, Arena Corinthians faces 2.5 billion reais in debt, while White Elephant stadiums stand largely empty. The names Fabio Luiz Pereira, Ronaldo Oliveira dos Santos, and Fabio Hamilton da Cruz remind us, when deadlines and dollars eclipse engineering and ethics, the cost is measured in lives, not just in losses.